Here we go. Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, February 19th, 2025, and this is a meeting of the Subcommittee of the Municipal and County Government to gather additional information as it pertains to House Bill 432 relative to recovery houses. If you could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. First person we'd like to speak to is Fire Marshal Toomey. Thank you for attending, Mr. Fire Marshal. Have you had the opportunity to review House Bill 432 relative recovery houses?
Good morning. Yeah, Sean Toomey, State Fire Marshal for the record. Yes, sir, I have taken a look at it. This is a bill that's very similar to what was introduced last year, and my office was involved in the definition part of it. We were not involved in the planning and zoning discussion because we feel like that's not our arena to be in. But as far as the definition itself, we worked with several of the stakeholders to try to refine the definition a little bit. One of the big things was that crossed out is that safe, healthy, family-like was being crossed out, and one of the conversation was sort of how do you define safe, healthy, and family-like? Family-like's not defined that well in the codes, and then safe and healthy was a little bit difficult. What we're relying on is further in 15310D. On the fire code side, we have about a dozen items that are required in order to meet the requirement for exemption. It talks about egress, for instance, a fire alarm system for places over eight people. It talks about smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms and heating systems at work and those types of things. And I think inherently when you follow those requirements and are certified by one of the certifying groups, that's safe and healthiness kind of comes with that for a well-run house. So we were amenable to removing that as long as they followed the rest of the process in that definition. The other big thing, adding the primarily non-transit dwelling unit, we wanted to recognize that the people that are living in a recovering house, from our perspective, are there for a period of time. Usually, these guys behind me, I think, could speak far better to it. But a year and a half is pretty customary, I believe, for someone that's living in a home. It's not a typical like a motel, hotel type situation where you're in and out in a day or a couple of days. So that people have a general familiarity with the house and the whereabouts of egress and things like that. So. And the last part of it, living as a single household, we wanted to recognize that there's a unit cohesiveness to these people living in recovery, which is part of their success in the path for recovery. So, we again getting away from the family-like, because we can't really define real well what a family-like is. But if you live as a single household and have the general whereabouts, I've used an example. Jonathan's behind me, but one of his places, a 3-family in Manchester, and I went in there several years ago and said to one of the residents on the first floor, "Hey, where's so-and-so on the third floor?" And they could tell me that exactly they were working at, the restaurant, Dunkin' Donuts or Market Basket down the street. I can't remember the exact specifics, but they knew where everyone was in there and when they were coming and going, and that's important to this. The last part of it in the definition cleanup is we don't want it a boarding house or rooming house, because those are more of renting a specific room and you don't necessarily know about the whereabouts. You have your own room is locked, and it's a very different feel versus the folks that are living in recovery and need that cohesiveness and kind of living together to be successful. So happy to try to answer any questions, but I think the big message is that our office has been involved in the definition change for the past year plus, and we're supportive of the definition change as it's presented. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from the members? Representative Frack?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. What requirements, or let me rephrase that. In other congregate living situation, such as a group home for developmentally disabled people, transitional housing, perhaps for people coming out of the criminal justice system, are the life safety code requirements or exemptions similar or different for what we're talking about here for the recovery house?
Thank you for the question. So that there's no exemptions for those other uses at this point. One of the things that we've been working on this with the recovery community since since about 2018. And one of the things that we learned early on is that through federal regulations that they're classified that they need an accommodation, and they need so the big thing for this is the sprinkler system. So I'm going to say family, like, even though we just crossed out, but living as a single household, which is the language that we've added in now, is that the people in recovery have to live as a single household to be successful. This needs to be a certain social model to make this work. And go back to some of these other congregate living scenarios, like the halfway houses or the transitional housing, or some of these other group homes. They're more in and out, and there's more of an individual component to it. That is what has always been portrayed and understood is a little bit different than these recovery houses, and they didn't fit quite as nicely into our code chapters, and that's why we did this carve out. And there's been some federal court cases that have kind of shown that people in recovery need to be treated a little bit differently in this case. I think going back to the code change, I think, is that most of these houses, that if they're, we need to inspect them because every house is a little different, but if we can meet the existing chapters, which typically we're talking sprinklers here in almost all cases, most existing buildings don't require sprinkler systems. And I think the big issue is these are sort of change of uses, change of occupancy in our code world. And, we're really letting them not sprinkle the building, but they're saying that where the fallback for us and I think in the code world is that they're living under that single household model, that they're representing or resembling like what would be in our own homes. I think some of what I've seen is people living in these big houses that might have, 6 bedrooms, and you put in 12 people in the house, 2 beds in a house. And it's a little bit different than some of those other occupancies that you spoke about. And I think that some of the other, you got to be very careful about the disabilities, I think, but as some of these congregate living situations exist that have like physical disabilities or cognitive disabilities that need that higher level of protection because of trying to help offset the ability to get out physically or something. If their people are stuck in the facility, you're going to want some of these other systems or different staffing models to make sure those people can get out safely. And folks that are in recovery are able-bodied like we are, and are they're in recovery, and they can get out and respond appropriately to a smoke alarm and get out a window or find another exit as needed. So hope that answers your question. I know it was a little bit lengthy.
It does. Thank you very much for your response.
Representative Dolan?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. A couple of the concerns that I have, if we're not going to require smoke alarms, or at least we're not going to require them to be checked. It says in the legislation that we're not going to be required to look at a permit or an approval process. So evidently we won't be able to check for the presence of smoke alarms or exit signs, for example. If someone needs a method of egress, but if it's at night and there's not going to be an exit sign, for them to be able to find their way out at night. So the question I have is, what can we do to protect the inhabitants of a a house like this, a recovery house like this, not only for the inhabitants, but for the neighbors. I mean, in many cases, these houses, large houses, are adjacent to other structures in the community that if there's a fire or a disturbance or whatever, it's going to bleed over. It could very, very well bleed over into the adjacent structures. What do we do to protect both the inhabitants of the recovery house and the neighbors in the community?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that I think we're maybe mixing the two sections a little bit, because of the way I understand this bill as written, there's less of an emphasis on planning and zoning approvals and site plan approvals, which takes a more of a hands-off approach, as you talked about on the planning and zoning sides. On the fire code and the building code sides, and especially on the fire code, because it speaks to the chapter 153, which is the state fire code, and I think the recovery community that are here behind me can speak to this, but there's no intent to push the fire departments out. The statute, the further statute 15310D actually allows the fire departments to do annual inspections of these facilities, which is above and beyond which we would normally see in another type of building. So I think, you know, as we worked with the recovery community over the past 6-7 years to address this, you know, they've understood and been working with the fire departments to allow the annual inspections, which is, you know, very different than a typical, say, apartment building, right? If you have an apartment building, I'm going to use Manchester or Nashua, say that was historically a 3 or 4, a 2 or 3 family structure that had separate dwellings, separate homes, and now we've got a recovery house in there that have multiple people in there. That house is actually being inspected now under 15310D by the fire department to make sure that the fire alarms are working, the smoke alarms are working, the egress is still there, the heating systems are still operating the way they're supposed to, and things like that. So I think under 153 we have a lot of ability to get in on an annual basis and work with the recovery house that's the operator to make sure that the facilities are safe.
Thank you. As a follow-up, as a professional in your discipline, when you encounter a proposal for a recovery house like this, maybe you could walk through the type of inspection that you do from a fire safety. Do you permit smoking anywhere in the facility? Do you require fire extinguishers, so many per occupant, that type of thing? Could you walk us through that?
Sure, yeah. So each of the recovery houses that, I'm going to try to pull it up because I don't remember all the points in detail, but each recovery house that's in operation in the state, usually it's over 4 people, but they would come and request a variance to the fire code from our office. And one of the inspectors of my office physically goes out and meets with each of the operators and walks through the facility and does an inspection to make sure that, as you said, the smoke alarms are good, extinguishers are good. We make sure there's contact information available to reach an owner. The street numbers are in place so they can see, you know, the fire department or EMS is responding, can find or police if they have to, can find the location of the property. Make sure the heating system's inspected annually, that the cooking equipment is in good shape. There's a no smoking provision in the building. You have to smoke a certain distance away. I believe it's 10 feet. Please don't quote me exactly on that. It's in the statute, but we go through that whole inspection. We work with the certifying body to make sure that there's a certification. There's a little nuance to that it usually takes a few months. For a new upcoming house, there's a little bit of time to get that certification in place. So we give them usually 6 months to get the certification, which is an additional follow-up to make sure that the recovery community, the house is running the way that the certification would require, which is above and beyond what we require on the fire code. So there's a checks and balances there. We want to see that paperwork submitted to our office, and then that annual inspection process happens. So any recovery house that's operating, I would say, legitimately and upfront, which is a good number of them, comes through our office, and we actually physically walk through with the local fire department each and every one of these before they open.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Walker.
Is the current code for multifamily homes to have sprinklers?
So if a new building, yes. All right. So
An older one?
an older, not likely, unless there's some reason for it. Existing buildings, existing apartments. It depends. There's a size component to this, and it's not as a real simple yes or no. But most existing, say, apartment buildings do not require a sprinkler system. If it's a high-rise situation, then you're in a sprinkler system scenario. But most existing are not required to have them. The caveat that we see a lot of times is if they're using them for a trade-off for something else, there's an egress problem or something like that, they'll put them in after the fact. All new construction over a 1 and 2 family dwelling has been required to have sprinklers for quite some time.
Because if a recovery house moves into a multi-family dwelling, they're all quadrant off. There's no connection, so they're not like you mentioned, a 6-bedroom house that a family used to live in that could all congregate. You can keep track of each other. These are going to be separate units with separate locks and all that. How does that pertain for safety codes? Wouldn't you want smoke detectors and sprinklers and all that stuff in there just for that?
I personally, I would love sprinklers everywhere. I sprinkled my own house, but I recognize that's not a fit for everybody. I know. So, my wife makes fun of me because we have duplicate smoke alarm systems in our house. But anyways, that's a different story too. But I think that at the end of the day, as long as we have working smoke and carbon monoxide alarms in what we're single unit dwellings and good means of escape or egress, that's the important part, right? Early detection and warning and getting people out. A sprinkler system for these existing structures is the icing on the cake, and I think is suitable for when there's a nuance that we need to address some uniqueness to it. It's hard to say. Like I said, I'd like them everywhere, but the code has allowed non-sprinkled structures, existing structures, for a very long time. It's very hard to retrofit. It's harder to retrofit some of these buildings than versus new construction. So I feel like I'm dancing around this a little bit, but I would love sprinklers everywhere, but I guess the truth is there's safety in buildings that are existing that are non-sprinkler. There's new construction that's different uses that are non-sprinkler based on size and construction type and a number of factors. So we can have a safe building being non-sprinkled, but I think that there's different requirements that you can intermingle into that equation, I guess, to make sure that you have a safe structure, right? So uses over 8 people, we put a residential alarm system, which is a little bit more of belt and suspenders than our regular smoke or carbon monoxide alarms that I hope that we would have in our own homes, recognizing that people take smoke alarms down. Well, if you have a monitored system, because you have 8, 10, 12 people in a house, well, if one of those comes down, someone's going to know about it. The owner, the operator of the structure is going to get notified by that alarm company, and that alarm's going to go off. So we've worked to try to add a little bit more to that. I'll go back to a quick question you had about like the multi-story. Use a 3-story structure. Right. Some of the 3-story structures, they run as sort of 3 separate units almost. Like there's three separate entities, and it's locked. Like it still runs as sort of an apartment, but there's more people. There might be 6 or 8 people in that floor based on the floor space, which is more than what we would normally be accustomed to. But there are some structures that whole 3-decker runs as one house, and there's no locks anywhere in the space. The bedrooms aren't locked. The doors between the units aren't locked, and it's a free flow where the first floor living room might be the living room where they sit and watch TV. The second floor one might have been turned into a space where they can meditate or do yoga or do something like that. And the third floor might be used for something a little different, the living room space. So, there's different scenarios out there, and I think that's the importance of us getting out in every one of them to understand the situation before they operate and do these inspections, and then understand what they're doing and to make sure that we have a facility that complies with the statute and the rules that we have in place.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Hey, so I know that you mentioned that certification before, and you said usually you like to see it in about 6 months. In what we have in front of us, it is a year. Do you think, like in your opinion, would we be able to bring that back to 6 months? Would a year be a little bit kind of too much time?
So I'm gonna. I think the I want to go back. So we just had a transition a little bit in some of the New Hampshire Corps' role, and then the New Hampshire Partnership for Recovery Residences' role recently in the last, I think, within the last 6 or 8 months or so. And we're trying to navigate the time. I think some of the timelines on that, and maybe someone behind me might be better able to answer it. If it, just thinking out loud, if it took a year to make that happen now, we still should be in there before it operates, and the fire departments have the year to get in there and do an inspection. So I think the end goal still is important to get the certification for the operation, because it helps provide better for parameters on how it operates. But I wouldn't. I guess I would be flexible, I guess is the best way to say it, on whether it's 6 months or a year, as long as we can maintain those other parameters in there. I think I will say that I've been in a lot of these facilities. The ones that are well run and follow these parameters and follow the certification process are great. And then the ones that are the bad actors are the problem ones. And I think the recovery community in general wants to follow the good model, is the ones that, there's bad actors in everything we do sometimes. But I think the end goal that I've seen over my years in the fire marshal's office is that there's a great emphasis within the recovery community to work to try to get a well-run model in there that's works for the recovery housing community and, follows as many of the guidelines as they can be possible.
Yeah, thank you for that response, and thanks for taking another question. With that certification, if one of these were to open up and not get it in that year, do you think, just based on the way this reads, makes me nervous that they could just reapply and just kind of keep doing that same process over and over again? I'm not sure kind of what you think about that.
Yeah, I think I guess I would concur with you. There's loopholes that's sometimes around stuff, and you don't want to. If you can close up some of those loopholes, it's good. I think there's also opportunities sometimes where things take a little bit longer than they need to legitimately. I think as long as we change something, there's an opportunity somewhere that they can ask for an extension, I guess and I don't know who that necessarily would be go to, but I think that. I think there's people that try to do things right and stumble on a roadblock and just need a little bit more time. And I think as long as we have a mechanism to work with those folks, I think that would be good.
Any other questions? I just have one for you, sir. How many recovery houses do we have in New Hampshire, do you know, that are checked by the fire departments?
The number is probably a little bit lower than we would like, and I think part of I would say it stems around the planning and zoning stuff. So I think there's still some that are sort of underground, as we call them, because they're afraid to come to the surface and get shut down by, and put these people on the street. If I had to take a wild guess, we probably have 20 or 24 that I know we've been in and certify. I can actually get you the exact list. There's more than that in the state. I do know that, but I just saw the inspector from my office that is pretty much dedicated to looking at these send me 4 of them yesterday to approve. So we're working closely to keep doing these approvals as well. But this planning and zoning thing has been a big challenge, I know, for the recovery community, that if they come to the surface, they end up getting closed down. So they try to stay under the radar. And I think that's why we don't see as many as we would like to sometimes.
Thank you. Just one more quick question. To get that inspection, presently they have to be certified to get that?
So we'll do the inspection without the certification and give them time to get the certification. So.
Representative Dolan?
Thank you. I had one additional question. recognizing that those in one of these homes is in a category, I'll say, one of the more vulnerable in our community that needs our help and needs us to look out for them when they're in this condition. Would you, if we pursued an amendment to this legislation that required sprinklers, would you be in support of that?
As I mentioned before, I would love sprinklers everywhere, but I think it would be a big detriment to the operation of these structures overall. I think you would find that most of them can't achieve that, and we'd effectively shut down a significant number of the recovery houses if we put that into place. Say it passed as of July 1 or something like that, we would see it'd have a significant impact on the recovery community is what I would think. And I think there's facilities out there that are running now that are safe. I guess that would be my 2 cents on that part.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir, for coming in.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Okay, William McKinney from New Hampshire Builders Officials Association, please. Morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to speak and inviting me here today. I'm Bill McKinney. I represent the New Hampshire Building Officials Association, which speaks on behalf of over 200 code officials throughout the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire Building Officials Association has worked with stakeholders for several years on this project of trying to clarify a path forward for recovery housing in New Hampshire. Recovery houses have long had a stigma of being homes for drug users. This is factually untrue. It is important for legislators and citizens to understand the value of recovery housing for the rehabilitation of those who have completed a treatment program. This is the next important step to substance-free living in New Hampshire. Due to recovery houses being a fairly new concept in New Hampshire, the building and fire codes and land use laws did not recognize their use. Barriers needed to be identified and resolved through amendments. Amendments to the building and fire codes to define recovery homes and include the use in the codes was completed in the 2024 legislative session. The amendments made to codes and requested here in HB 432 help New Hampshire better align with federal law with regards to disabilities. A key component of HB 432 is the requirement for certification through a recognized organization that has clear standards of operation. Boarding or rooming houses have no required certification and therefore do not have the same standards of operation. The certification process for recovery homes bring a higher comfort level to code officials that the required standards are being regularly monitored. And that is an important piece of recovery housing over, again, boarding houses or rooming houses. No certification or loss of the certification brings much more stringent building and fire code requirements into play. Recovery homes do get some waivers, as you've heard from the fire marshal, as far as sprinkler systems. If they're not a certified home, they lose that waiver, and then they would now have to look at sprinkling that building as a rooming or a boarding house. Amending the land use law in HB 432 is the next step to addressing the barriers that prevent recovery houses that is necessary to helping curb the addiction problems in New Hampshire. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Representative Dolan.
Thank you for taking my question. Do you believe that these buildings and the use of these buildings ought to be ADA compliant?
If the federal guidelines were to require that, then yes. However, under the homes having not a change of use, not having alterations that exceed 50% of the floor area of the building, they wouldn't require ADA upgrades. If they did alterations to the buildings, and again, if they if it was classified as a change of use, which it isn't under the codes in this case, then the ADA or accessibility under the building code would apply. But again, under a one or two family dwelling that's still being utilized as a one or two family dwelling, the accessibility in ADA does not apply.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Representative Walker?
My understanding of the exemptions that they're getting, what kind of zoning and local exemptions do they have? Do they require? What particular codes do they got to get exempt from or waived?
Good question. I can't speak to the zoning. I don't. I only dabble that in my profession. But as far as the exemptions that they receive, the largest one is the sprinkler system that they can apply to the state fire marshal's office and receive a waiver from sprinkler systems, which is a very costly system to install, and in some areas almost impossible when you think about some of the rural areas where some of these homes may be. As far as zoning exemptions, that would be left up to the individual communities to determine whether they can get an exception through either a waiver process or a variance.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Matt Sullivan, please. Morning, Mr. Sullivan. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions if you'll indulge me. Uh, would you agree that there are in our population people that need to be in a recovery house that may have a disability?
Thank you for the question, Representative Dolan. I would agree with components of that statement. There are obviously individuals in the community that need the support of living in a household unit, perhaps with individuals that are having a similar experience or dealing with similar challenges. What I would perhaps add as nuance to that statement is simply that they're living in that format or in that household typology should not necessarily mean that they are treated differently from a regulatory perspective, but certainly the need does exist in the community. That's your question.
Thank you. And how do you address those individuals that seek recovery, who can't use the bathroom, or who don't have access in and out of the front door? How do you deal with that and that we might find in these cases?
Thank you for the question, Representative. And I don't know if I can speak to the details of the operations. I think that's what you're getting to. As a regulator, I'm not necessarily.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. Looking at the multifamily structure part of it, I'm not sure how many of those that you have in Nashua, but could you speak to, if you do have them, is there any data that it is effective for the people living in these homes and kind of what the effect is on the community around those?
It's a great question. Thank you, Representative, for that. Obviously, in the city of Nashua, we allow recovery housing in a variety of forms, whether that be single, two,
I just have a quick question. You require certification in Nashua for a recovery house?
require certification within the city of Nashville. One of the benefits, of course, of certification is that it's a very overt and public representation that the recovery home is operated in a manner that's consistent with best practices and with community interests, but we do not require certification. In fact, it's those that do not require certification that have often been the home for we've had issues. So I can't speak enough to the necessity of the certification process, but it's not a requirement in the city.
Another quick question for you. If you do have issues with a non-certified recovery house, how do you enforce, or what laws do you have, regulations you have to enforce them to do that? Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Walker.
Do you have any police data on those 30 houses? How many trips? How many? That sort of thing.
Representative Walker, I don't in front of me today. I could certainly provide some of that information. Anecdotally, we have had discussions though, and we don't see increased frequency for all of those homes. We have had some problematic locations in the city, but again, no more than other households where we have regular disturbances. But if that's something the committee might be interested in, we can certainly provide that.
That would be helpful.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for coming in. Nice seeing you again. Okay, Sam Durfee, City of Nashua. Morning, sir. Thanks for coming in. Thank you. Questions? Representative Dolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. As you can tell by my previous questions, I'm a little concerned about ADA compliance. In Nashua, how many exceptions have you taken for Nashua City Hall not being ADA compliant?
Thank you for the question, Representative Dolan. Specifically to the city hall's accessibility,
Right.
I don't have that data in front of me. We do have elevators, we do have ramps. However, I don't know if there have been complaints about accessibility to city hall itself.
Let me say that I'm going to assume that you're fully ADA compliant at the City Hall. And the question in context is, if that's what you're offering to the community, so people have access, whether they're disabled or not, that they have access to their local government. The concern I have is when somebody who may be disabled that wants to use one of these homes may not have access, and therefore you might be creating a double standard in the community. If you want to go to the town hall, you have full access. If you want to go to a recovery house, you don't. So that's a consideration that I offer back that you might want to think about how you might want to deal with that. And I'm interested in your comment about that. I don't mean to create an unanswerable question, but it's a thought that's going through my mind. And in the context of here we have some very vulnerable people in our community that we want to help, yet we may be denying them access to the house that they may have to live in.
Understood. Thank you very much for the.
Representative Walker.
So I'll ask you the same question. How many or what type of exceptions or waivers from the zoning would a recovery house get?
Certainly. So as we currently regulate them, none. However, we do have some regulations that do come into apply that create, some guardrails around use. One of which is regulating unrelated occupancy, whereas currently we have a regulation that bases occupancy thresholds on the type of building, sometimes the type of use. And we have a table in our ordinance that basically says, take a single family home, for example. You would be allowed one unrelated occupant per 300 square feet of livable area. For the example of a 3,600 square foot home, that would be 12 individuals. Now you can turn that on its head a little bit and say, well, you can have a really large family where or they are related individuals. And, you know, when we talk about this regulation, it's really in terms of making sure that we don't expose neighborhoods to over-occupancy, an undue density of occupancy. But a natural family would not be subject to that. This is a regulation that is accepted under the Fair Housing Act. Obviously, though, it does, when you look at it, you are treating people differently based on their related or unrelated status. But that is one of the regulations from which someone coming to establish this use may seek some variance or relief from that. The zoning board always considers context, neighborhood, building typology, things like that, but we have not actually seen any of these requests associated with this sort of a use. I think that might just be indicative that the thresholds and the standards around our unrelated occupancy table are reasonable in the current market.
You didn't exactly give me a number, but
Are you asking for a number of regulations?
that you have waivers for a recovery house.
So that would be the one regulation.
Just
that-
one?
Yes, because we don't actually have recovery housing established as a use. The way we treat it is whatever the building is. So this is right in line with this legislation as it's proposed. If it's a single-family home, it's being treated as a single-family home. It's subject to those occupancy standards on that single-family line at the table. So that's really the key thing. If a building is being developed, built, you know, setbacks, lot area, you know, standard dimensional regulations that go along with any site development would still apply, but it's no different for a recovery home versus any other use that would be occupying the lot.
If you took a single-family home, a very large one, that's in a single-family zoned area, and it gets, more rooms get made or whatever to more people go into that single-family home than normal, would that be allowed?
Again, it's going to come down to that one person per 300 square feet. So yes, new bedrooms could be made, but the way our code operates, it's not based on bedroom. It's square footage of the building all told. So they can make as many bedrooms as they want, but they're still constrained by the square footage of the building.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Representative Frack, please.
Thank you. In Nashua, do you differentiate your occupancy codes on areas that are served by town sewer, town water versus more rural areas where you have on-site water and on-site septic?
Any other questions?
John,
Representative Dolan, please.
one quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since permitting or approval process is limited for this application, this legislation, what input do local residents, in particular neighbors, of projects like this, what opportunity do they have to provide input to folks like you and people who run the local government about their feelings about these approval process?
Certainly. So under the way we currently regulate, because this use on the general scale that we're seeing them, where it's a single building, there's a change of use, that's an administrative approval. There is no public hearing before the planning board So in that instance, there is no public process. When you look at what the impact is, you know, obviously I think you do have some chances where you could go a bit extreme, where you have a very large house that could house quite a few individuals, you know, 15, 18, 20 individuals. There may be concerns about, you know, the possibility of overcrowding. But again, tying it to the square footage of a house, hopefully that is mitigated. Obviously, then you get into things like parking and many other extraneous concerns. But because it's really just a conversion of the use, but at the same time, the use is relatively similar. It's now a protected class of individuals that are moving in. In my professional opinion, that's not something that would rise to the level of necessitating a public hearing, simply because the change is not significant, typically in terms of density of residences or other concerns. And I do want to speak to the fact that this legislation is requiring certification, and I think that adds a important distinction, and I think a level of comfort to, you know, the residences, and takes a significant step towards fighting the stigma associated with this. And I think that's a very, very positive piece of this.
Thank you.
Representative Freck.
Thank you. Most development projects that I'm familiar with that require some sort of a certification or public hearing, the certification happens prior to the start of the development. And in the case of recovery houses, they are given a period of time, whether it's 6 months or 12 months is irrelevant. But the point being that the house needs to be up and running before the certification authority can provide that certification. My question is, it's kind of not the normal way of doing things, the normal order. And how has that been received amongst the broad community of residents in the city of Nashua?
Well, I don't think that I'd be able to speak to, you know, the general public in Nashua's perception of this particular element of the bill, but I will speak to how I would see that, how we would operate through that. I have no concerns about this essential grace period where you do get up and running, but then you are required to seek this certification. I think that's a fine way to operate, understanding that you know, some of these operators, they need that grace period. They need to have some revenue. They need to fund the certification process itself. But I do think that what this legislation provides is a level of protection, regulatorily speaking, but that hook being you do have to achieve certification. I think that there is some thought exercises that need to occur where what does happen if they do not achieve certification. You know, is that a state enforcement? Is this something that we work with a certifying authority on how we manage that? Does it come down to the local level? I think that's something that there does need to be a further conversation around. But as of right now, I don't have a lot of pause around this.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. Going back to that certification, do you think that with the year it's at right now, that it could be cut back to maybe 6 months with additional time if you're working with the municipality?
I think that it could. I don't necessarily see a benefit to cutting it back. I think a year is a reasonable amount of time. I also don't believe that I would be the right person to really answer that. I don't know the ins and outs of the certification process. I don't know if achieving certification in 6 months is actually reasonable. So I wouldn't want to say that, you know, let's cut it down to 6 months, and then we find out that no one can actually achieve it in 6 months. I think that's something we really want to hear from the certified authority.
Any other questions? I just have a quick question for you. The city of Nashua seems to have addressed a lot of the things locally within this bill as far as regulating the recovery houses. Why do we need this bill? Shouldn't this be done at the local level rather than through the state?
That's a very good question. I will say that I think that we are in Nashua a bit of an outlier simply because we have so many of these and we've seen them and they've actually been challenged in court in different ways where we are kind of at the point of the spear navigating, again, the relationship between local regulations and federal law. I think that this bill is necessary in part.
Thank you for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay. Anthony Salvucci. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name too bad. Yes, sir. Thank you for coming in, sir.
My name is Anthony Salvucci. I am the Director of Business Development and Community Relations for the New Hampshire Coalition of Recovery Residences. We are a certifying agency here in the state of New Hampshire. I am rising today in support of House Bill 432. This bill is extremely important to solidify a definition of recovery housing in the state of New Hampshire. As many previous speakers have said today, the stigma and the nuances of the planning and development processes can become cumbersome throughout the state and limit the ability to open up suitable and safe drug and alcohol-free housing in every community in this great state. New Hampshire Coalition of Recovery Residences partnered up with the Fletcher Group and performed a study on the amount of homes that were needed in this state of New Hampshire, and that was estimated at 15,000. And after conversations with NHPRR and ourselves, I believe there's approximately 108 certified homes and only 1,340 certified beds in the state. So we have a significant shortfall, and it is imperative that we all begin to address this. And I think the first step is having a common understanding of what recovery housing is, what recovery housing provides, and how recovery housing is intended to slip in and become part of any community and any neighborhood that the operator chooses to open. I am in support. We are fully in support. I can provide you with the NAR standards of certification, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Representative Dolan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 1,300 beds in the state. What's your estimate as to how many beds do we really need?
As stated, they estimate 15,000.
1,300 to 15,000?
Right now we have 1,300, and after the study with the Fletcher Group, it is 15,000.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. In your experience, kind of as these homes get bigger and we get into the multifamily use, is there evidence or data somewhere that this is still an effective method for the people living in those homes, and that it's still kind of the impact on the community?
I don't have any of that data in front of me. I'm sure we could work with some of our partners and also with the National Alliance of Recovery Residents and try to collect some of that data a little bit more globally, and I'll provide it to this committee once we receive it. But what I will say is the social model of recovery is the gold standard throughout the United States of America. And it is imperative and important that these homes operate with larger than normal size, I guess, as you would compare it to a single family use, because of the fact that those individuals within that home are relying upon the other individuals that are going through the same challenges, concerns, thought processes, struggles, and they rely on one another. Without that support next to you, or without ample support in that home around you, people tend to suffer.
Go ahead, Representative.
Yes, are the majority of the recovery homes around are single family or two family? Do you have, how many, what's the percentage for like multifamilies do you have, or is that something new that you're pursuing?
I don't have that count in front of me. What I could say is they do range from 1, 2, and 3 family homes.
Three-family.
Yes.
Representative Frank?
Thank you. Changing the focus of the discussion just a bit here. Excuse me. Our recovery houses are set up as a business. Is that a valid assumption?
It's like any other real estate. An LLC or a particular owner will purchase a building and then either lease it or operate the recovery residents themselves. So they would file business filings, but for all intents and purposes, the home does not operate as a business. It operates as a single family. There is not brick and mortar foot traffic that is going to be coming into that home. So that gray area tends to be something that individuals jump towards in an opportunity to raise the stigmatic approach of recovery housing and preventing them from coming to the area. But the reality of it is the individuals living within that home are living as a single family unit, and the business is recovery in that house.
So are the businesses set up as nonprofits or profit-making entities?
We have both entities throughout the state of New Hampshire. Some are nonprofit. But again, NH Corps, along with the Fletcher Group, did a study and found that it is significantly more expensive to operate a recovery home as a nonprofit than as a for-profit business due to additional positions that are within those boards and those organizations, which translates down to a more expensive housing fee for individuals that are seeking that housing. So we have both in the state of New Hampshire, and they'll submit whatever appropriate taxes that they should be. But the majority of homes in New Hampshire are not nonprofit organizations.
Thanks.
Representative Walker?
That brings up a subject in my mind. Do the individual people living in these homes pay rent, or is there, how is the payment rent transaction done?
So there's no rent in recovery housing. There is a housing fee or a fee for service, but there is no landlord-tenant relationship between those individuals because of the fact that a normal landlord-tenant situation wouldn't allow him to remove someone from the home for consuming drugs or alcohol, whereas recovery residences need to ensure that the remainder of the residents of the house are able to live free from drugs and alcohol. So that we call them housing fees. Typically, the individual is expected to pay that out of pocket. There are numerous scholarship and state and federal funding that is available through the Doorways of New Hampshire, as well as some other nonprofit organizations that will assist. But the goal long term is to get these individuals to obtain 40-hour-a-week gainful employment, or whether that be, working full-time, volunteering full-time, or any combination thereof, or attending schooling to become a more competitive individual in the employment market as they move to independent living. The purpose is to have them pay their own fees so that they understand what it's going to be like as they move on to independent living. Too much funding and too much additional money can be considered enabling. There is conversations throughout the federal government right now that is considering a Medicare, Medicaid payee insurance situation, but that has not come to fruition. And clearly with the new administration, there's some uncertainty how that's going to proceed in the future.
If I may.
Right, sir.
The tenant landlord situation, if you violate your lease or you do some drinking or whatever, drugs in the house, you can be evicted, but that eviction process can be like 30, 60 days. If a person in a recovery house disrupts, breaks the rules, relapses and uses drugs on premises, how is that handled by the recovery house?
So every house may handle it a little bit differently, but there is an expectation through NHCOR as a certifying body. I will not speak for NHPRR. They have a representative here as well. But for NHCOR, it is expected that all recovery homes operate with a relapse plan. Some residents have individuals sign it upon arrival, where it kind of gives them a breakdown of what that would look like. There is the safety of the other residents that we have to keep in mind. Keeping someone that is intoxicated or under mind-altering drugs or alcohol cannot remain in that house. So typically what the process would be is the individual will be confronted or UA'd in order to determine if they had consumed illegal drugs or alcohol. And then there would be a discussion on whether or not that, if it is positive, whether or not that individual wanted to go to a respite in order to provide some time in order to provide a clean urinalysis to come back to that home, if that is an option. There's been no other safety issues that go along with the relapse. They can elect to go back into a treatment, PHP, IOP, inpatient. But we have to also remember that these individuals are not incarcerated. They are not required to be in recovery housing, so they also have the option to leave and go to a friend's house if that's what they choose to do, or at their own expense get a hotel. Operators are educated appropriately, as well as their house leadership, on the fact that individuals need to be placed in a safe location if that is an option. So we want them communicating with that individual. One of the houses in particular that I've spoken to, that I have some knowledge of, it's a requirement upon arrival to select what option you would have in the event of a reoccurrence. And if there is that reoccurrence, we're able to kind of look back at the resident and say, you're changing your mind right now on something that sober you said was a better idea. Maybe you should listen back to who you are. And then they'll bring them on to that respite, that IOP or that PHP.
Thank you.
Representative Dolan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we look at recovery houses in this context, typically those in recovery have good days and bad days. Sometimes they fall out of recovery, and we tend to call that a relapse. In those cases, how often do you require law enforcement to be involved and or mental health professionals to intervene or something similar to that?
We currently don't track that data specifically, but
I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone on.
I don't be able to hear
You're able to hear me?
If you have to repeat for the record.
Well, no, I don't think so.
I don't have that data directly in front of me. I can say from my personal experience, we've had interactions with the fire department due to the false alarms from the system, but I've had zero interaction at the recovery house affiliated with the police in the opportunities of
Thank you.
Representative Germana?
Thank you. Can you speak to that process of gaining that certification and kind of what that timeline looks like?
Sure, I mean, it's a comprehensive process that takes place. There's 31 standards that the New Hampshire Coalition of Recovery Residences utilizes. Those are the NAR, the National Alliance of Recovery Residents.
Actually, have a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Perfect. So do you believe that the way it's written here, that there is a chance someone could abuse it and just keep reapplying for that certification?
In terms of re or abuse, I would say no, right? This is not, the way I view this bill is the individuals that are gonna be trying to exercise this are the ones that are willing to come to the forefront. Notify the community that they're attempting to operate, as well as the planning board and the certifying body, which would by default be EHHS. These individuals, it's an expensive endeavor to try to push off, and the, I guess, carrot on the top of that cake is the fact that once you get your certification, your residents would be eligible. If you're certified through BRR, there would be that state fund, which would obviously bring more residents to you.
Great, thank you.
Representative Frank.
Thank you. Has your organization or any of its members ever had any conversations with DES or with town officials about occupancy levels that exceed the design parameters for the septic system of the particular property?
Any other questions? I just have a couple. I contacted Health and Human Services. And how many recovery houses do you have that are part of your group right now?
Part of NH4 specifically?
Yeah.
We are, the last time I spoke with our certification specialist, which was Friday last week, it was 97.
Okay, those are ones that are being certified. Do you have members that aren't certified that belong to the group? No, okay. Now, how does it work with the registry? There's a voluntary registry, I guess, through Health and Human Services. How does that relationship work?
So, currently, New Hampshire Partnership of Recovery Residences is the sole certifying agency for the state of New Hampshire as it pertains to the voluntary registry to receive state and federal funding. We're working with the state at this time to discuss that. NH4 has been the certifying body in the state of New Hampshire for many years. We established in 2017. Certifying at that time, so we're hopeful that certification with either body will allow the state to feel as though both organizations are certifying to the national standard. I think that there is a superior need in this state to ensure that individuals are eligible for that funding, and would also like to take this moment just to point out that it is not the home that you are funding, it is the resident. They get to choose wherever they decide to reside, whether that be in Concord in a recovery home or Santa Monica in a recovery home. We are funding the resident, not the home.
Just another quick follow-up. How do I lose my certification? Who checks the certification? Is it yearly, or once I get it, is that there forever, or how does it work?
Yeah, so annually, NH4 requires that every home that is certified through NH4 is reviewed annually. That includes another documentation review, complete upload, complete review and read-through by a certification team, as well as an additional walkthrough to ensure that they are actually maintaining the implementation of said policy and procedure. If there's any changes, we double check those. And then we have an ombudsman process, as NHPRR, which is an opportunity for individuals to submit complaints, and clearly if there's complaints, there will be reviews in that time, and may be reviewed prior to that.
What happens if this law is passed and recovery house goes and opens up, and they lose the certification? What's going to happen to that house? They can still operate, or can you think of any penalties that could apply? If I passed the first time around my certification, this law passes, 2 years later I lose my certification, what protection is there to make him get that certification again so that they comply with the law?
So we're not typically, unless it's truly egregious, we're not going to revoke a certification in that nature. There would be some kind of action plan established with that. So we would follow up. The policy is out of date. We would notify that they had a certain period of time we would get compliance, and at that point, my suggestion is that if individuals do have their certification revoked, and it's egregious enough that neither certifying body believes as though they're appropriate, that the municipality take the appropriate action. NH4, and I don't want to speak for NHBRR, but I'm pretty confident that they feel the same way. We don't want bad acting. This statute is to bring people to work with the community, no longer be underground. It is voluntary certification. Those that are seeking relief under this bill are the ones that are coming to you. It's the individuals that are out there operating without certification that we all need to work on.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Frack.
Yeah, how do I know as either a potential resident or as a member of the community if a particular house is certified, not certified, or is not current on its certification? How is that information made available to the public?
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Brody DeShays from the New Hampshire Municipal Association, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, and thank you to the subcommittee for letting me speak today. For the record, my name is Brody DeShays. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we currently oppose the bill as written. I've learned a lot meeting with some of the other stakeholders that are currently in this room about recovery homes and how they're regulated in different municipalities, how they're regulated by the state and the federal government. Our biggest concern is that this bill would mandate that all recovery homes be treated as single-family, two-family, or multifamily use in every zoning ordinance across the state. It would prevent municipalities from regulating recovery homes that qualify as congregate living in their zoning ordinances. I use that term specifically because it's used in Keene's zoning ordinance, and they have a pretty comprehensive zoning ordinance on what congregate living is and what types of uses fall under that. And many recovery homes are utilized as congregate living spaces and being owned and facilitated by nonprofits or for-profit institutions. So sometimes they're owned, sometimes they pay the people's rent or the quote fees that they'll pay to the landlords. This also amends the definition of quote recovery homes to be quote primarily non-transient dwelling or dwelling units, which in our opinion is not an accurate depiction of recovery homes and their usage in every single municipality. We heard some of that in the testimony that you guys received a few weeks ago. We believe that by their very nature, recovery homes are not dwellings, that they are dwellings that service a transient population. There's no expectation that they stay there for a very extended period of time. There's an expectation that eventually they need to leave and go on to independent living. I want to point out there was a hearing yesterday in front of the House Housing Committee on House Bill 457, which is a more expansive mandate that allows congregate living or group homes in all residential zones. And congregate or group living versus regular dwellings is very different. Imagine the difference between your house or your apartment and dormitories, right? Dormitories have those communal spaces where there's a communal kitchen, communal bathrooms. You know, everyone has shared wastewater and shared trash disposal. You have different rooms. Sometimes they can be locked, sometimes they're unlocked, versus our house, you know, or an apartment that we may live in. You know, you have all your own bathrooms. You have your own, you know, locked door. Your entire unit, your dwelling is closed off to others. You're not sharing your kitchen with your neighbors. You might share a hallway if you live in an apartment building. If you live on a single family, you know, residence, that's a house. You have your own lot to yourself. So, so these congregate living situations are much different as a use versus what I'm going to call, for the purposes of this discussion, regular dwellings. And there's an interest to regulate for safety, health, and general welfare, especially general welfare, congregate living situations differently than regular dwellings, whether it be single-family dwellings, two-family dwellings, or multifamily dwelling housing. And congregate housing is a change of use in some zoning ordinances in some municipalities across the state. It's actually not a lot that regulate congregate living, but it tends to be college towns or places where, you know, that are higher density or urban areas where people might try to become roommates, or where college landlords might try to lease out per bedroom. And so you might have per bedroom occupancy zoning ordinances to try to prevent, you know, too many people from living in one singular dwelling, and making sure that congregate living dwellings are away from single family neighborhoods or two family neighborhoods, because again, their usage is different and their impact on a community's infrastructure, traffic, and especially parking is much different than a single family dwelling. Unrelated people living together too are much different, behave differently than families. Just for an example, cars, right? If you have a family of 5, you're still likely going to have only 2 cars. If you have 8 people living in a congregate living situation, it's more likely each person's going to need a car, because the reality in New Hampshire is we don't have a lot of public transit. People need to drive to get to work. So, and they can't necessarily always carpool, because I might work, you know, one's 1 hour west and the other one's 1 hour east. So municipalities have an interest of, when there's a change of use requiring as part of the variance and site plan review, making sure that there's additional parking and it works with the current traffic patterns, especially in dense areas. And this is especially true with leases by bedroom. If you do lease by bedroom, I'm not sure if recovery homes would do it that way, but with congregate living situations, you might have a lease by bedroom. Recovery homes are a little bit different, as we've discussed. There are fees that they pay, but still those fees could be a fee per bedroom that you live in. And if all of a sudden you decide, well, I don't want to pay the fees to live in this recovery home, I'm going to go live in another one. Well, they'll probably fill someone else in, so then that's more of a transient use too. Zoning ordinances, they do help and they don't hurt the ability of municipalities to have safe, responsible development. It's trying to make sure that specific uses are done in zones that have been developed for 40, 50, 60 years to be able to deal with that infrastructure impact of whether it's congregate living, multifamily dwellings, or single-family dwellings, and whether the waste water is discharged through the sewer system or done through a traditional septic on-site wastewater disposal. I'd like to really stress again, site plan approval is important when you're doing the parking and the traffic planning if you require more parking spaces. Also, the threshold for congregate living in many zoning ordinances is typically aligned with the fire code, so 4 unrelated people. So it's not an arbitrary number. It's kind of aligned with the fire code because there might be additional modifications that need to be made to the dwelling to ensure that it's in accordance with the fire code. Also, regulating congregate housing is not discrimination. It's about the property and the dwelling use, not those who are using it or trying to change the use. Now, if someone was, let's say an organization, a nonprofit or for-profit facilitating recovery housing wanted to use a multifamily dwelling, so it had 6 units or 7 units, 8 units, and they wanted to make it so that each unit, someone who was in recovery would live in there. Or they could even do it so there are 2 unrelated people living in each dwelling unit. That's not a change of use. In many zoning ordinances, that's still a multifamily dwelling. Now, if all of a sudden, if it's a single family dwelling and you're putting 4, 5, 6 people, or even in a multi-dwelling unit, you're trying to put more than 4 people in each dwelling unit, then it becomes congregate use. The use changes, and typically you need to go get a variance. I'd like to also mention, again, so that's a distinction. So multifamily is not congregate use. There's multifamily use, there's congregate use. And any municipality can adopt the language in this legislation on their own. It sounds like, to me, the previous municipality spoke that they've adopted a lot of these things in their ordinances, and it's their belief that that's a benefit to their community. We've had more municipalities tell us that this mandate would make it harder for them to have safe, responsible zoning ordinances that promote the health, welfare, and safety of their municipalities. I'd also like to point out that if a for-profit is commercial use, that's also a change from residential to commercial if it's owned by a for-profit or it's being used by a for-profit. So that's something that would impact it too. So all of a sudden, if any for-profit were to operate a dwelling unit in any zone as a recovery home, we'd have concerns that they would try to maybe mix the waters of, is this really a residential use versus a commercial use? To the vice chairman's point, this is part of the reason why these are dealt with locally and by the voters adopting ordinances. And I'd also like to point out that many communities don't regulate congregate living situations. And the reason why is because in many small municipalities, it's not an issue, right? If you have, 6 unrelated people who decide to rent a home on a 2-acre lot that's, zoned for, or that has like a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom septic system, there's no impact on the abutters or the municipality or its infrastructure. But where this really becomes a problem is where they are regulated, which is denser areas and college towns. So it's our belief that those communities have developed over a, multi-decade period to ensure that each zoning district has the capacity and the ability to deal with the types of dwellings and how the dwellings are used. And it's probably best to not disrupt that reasonable and planning that's been done for decades. And I'll take any questions if you guys have any.
Thank you, Mr. Deshays. What questions from Mr. Deshays? Seeing none, thank you for coming in, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one more card left, and that's Jonathan Gerson. Did you want to talk, John? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Gerson. I'm an operator, so I thought I'd sit up here and give you my perspective without giving you a whole spiel. I'd rather just open it up to, some questions, but just to give you a little bit of my background.
Go ahead, sir.
The agency is into action, sober living. We've been operating since 2017. We have homes for men and homes for women. All the homes are certified. I've been doing the work also as an advocate. I support new operators, throughout the state. I have been in front of many zoning boards, in front of many planning boards, both on behalf of my own homes, projects that I wanted to attempt in other municipalities, and also for those those people that I work with. And I've seen the challenges of not having a definition of recovery housing. I've seen it play out, and I've been in a lot of zoning and planning board meetings where the board itself wanted to support the application, but naturally the NIMBY issues come up, and the entire neighborhood comes out in full force. And the zoning board's hands are tied, despite them wanting to support the application. Typically, our type of, I don't want to speak legally, but typically it doesn't seem we meet the variance criteria specifically, all the criteria, and where we're looking for a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act. Many zoning boards and planning boards around the state don't seem to be prepared to really rule on those types of applications. So again, I've seen municipalities, zoning boards, planning boards want to support these homes and have these homes in their community. They work with RCOs, community organizations, healthcare organizations, and they all want these homes. They do, because they know that they work. But they don't have any, and they're not going to have any, because operators like me wouldn't dare go to certain cities and towns in this state, because we know. So having this defined, because as a residential use, and bringing the parties that really know how they operate, which would be the State Fire Marshal's Office, who you've heard from, because the way I read this legislation, it requires us to notify the municipality, hey, we're here, we're here, which then requires us to notify State Fire Marshal's Office, have them do their walkthroughs, and it also requires us to notify the certifying body and maintain certification. So now you have all the parties that really should be providing oversight of these recovery houses. So what you're going to have is there are a lot of good homes out there, and this, I think, would remove some of those quote unquote bad actors that you've maybe heard some of the complaints about. Because I would like to say, I think I'm one of the good actors, and a lot of people have success in our homes. And we need homes like I provide, and like a lot of other people like myself provide. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. What questions do we have? Representative Walker.
What size home do you run?
So we have 8, and they're all different. So we have 2 types of houses. We have the more structured house, which we certify as what's called a level 3 house. There's some more support. There's more, for example, in a level 3 house, they do a morning meditation every morning together. They have their weekly house meeting. They're provided some recovery support, case management from somebody off-site that doesn't live there. And those are level 3 homes. We have, in those homes, we have 3 men's homes. Those are approximately 18 men. They're large homes. They're all approximately 4,500, 5,000 square feet total square footage. And then we have 2 smaller women's homes. Then one is a single family and one is a 2 family. Those have 11 women. And then the remaining 3 homes are what I call a phase 2 home. These are for people that have been with us for about a year. They meet certain other criteria. They've been stable employment for a long period of time. They meet in certain recovery goals. We do practice a 12-step program, so they have to have met certain, accomplishments in that program. Again, stable employment, and some other things. Been compliant with all of our house requirements for an extended period of time. Once they are at that point and they choose to step down to a phase 2 home, we do have those options for both men and women. Less structure. There's a reduction in the cost to their weekly fee, and those homes, one is a single they're all single family.
Oh, single family? How many bedrooms? Well,
One of them is 5-bedroom. 2 of them are 5-bedroom, and the other one is 6-bedroom.
thank you. Follow up? Go ahead. I could see, I've been on a planning board in Rochester for 18 years.
So
And
you
I
know
can
about a property.
Oh, yeah, and I can tell you, you are going to run into problems with zoning boards just the way they're designed.
Yeah.
Because you have to meet their 5 criteria for hardship.
Right.
And I don't think you probably don't meet one of them because it's not designed for that
Correct.
sort of thing.
Correct.
So that's a tough hurdle to get around.
Correct.
And the planning board, you're right. You're going to have all the neighborhood come out in the planning board and have public input. And I can see some planning board members getting kind of concerned that they're going against what the community wants. So I think you do have a tough road to go through that kind of permitting system. But I think it's a necessary one because it's a complicated issue. I know we've had a lot of boardrooms filled with people because of boarding houses. Because oh man, did the neighborhoods come out against the boarding room houses in certain neighborhoods? So I can see you getting into a dense neighborhood is going to be difficult. You're more have to be on the less dense areas. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Dolan.
May I add one
course.
thing to that? Again, I've tried projects in other cities and towns that I couldn't move forward in after some obstacles and challenges in front of zoning or planning. But so primarily, I do understand Manchester very, very well. And what's unfortunate is the way the zoning map is laid out. If you follow the zoning map and the zoning ordinance where it's identified as congregate housing, in the interpretation is we are congregate housing according to their table of uses, then you are only allowed in the toughest neighborhoods in the city. And I do want to say that those are some of the neighborhoods that people in recovery desperately need to escape. And so, yeah, I want to say that as well.
I don't disagree with that. That's not exactly a place that you want someone in recovery in.
Correct.
Too many temptations or influences that could be detriment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Dolan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. You seem to indicate that you're aware that many zoning boards would like to have more recovery houses, but they're reluctant to approve it, probably because of adverse public reaction to it. Are you looking for us in the legislature to mandate that the zoning boards approve recovery houses?
I think by having a definition of what recovery housing is would be incredibly helpful. Because again, I've been in front of, I don't want to name the municipality, but a very small municipality. So the zoning ordinance, I don't even think it was adopted until like 2005, their first zoning ordinance. There was nothing even close, remotely close in their ordinance to what we do. And so it was almost impossible to even give a proposal. It would be very helpful in trying to present an application or, to be able to open a recovery house if there was a definition for it.
Does, as a follow-up, does this legislation fulfill that requirement in your mind to offer that definition?
Yes.
Any other questions? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. In your experience with those larger houses, is it still as effective for each person that walks in the door as it would be for some of the houses with fewer people in them in terms of staying sober and kind of staying with that mission to stay clean and kind of move on?
Absolutely. And it was for me, just, and complete disclosure. I moved up here from Boston. I'm a Massachusetts transplant. I love New Hampshire. I came up here in early 2016, and I moved into a recovery house, one of the few that was around back then in New Hampshire. I think there was about 5 or 6, and I came up here and into a house of about 19 guys, and it saved my life. There's a sweet spot. I have noticed that the women's homes do better, a little smaller size. Men seem to do well in more of a fraternity type brotherhood than the women's homes do. So smaller homes for the women's, at least for interaction sober living.
Any other questions? I just got a couple. How long would you usually stay in a recovery house? You mentioned a couple of different phases, I guess.
So when I do a phone screen so I do the phone screens for the men. I have a recovery case manager that does all the women's phone screens. I try to keep some distance. But when I do a phone screen, I always recommend a minimum of 6, or I ask for an agreement, a commitment to 6 months, but I recommend 1 year. And I was actually just looking at January's average length of stay, because I know somebody had asked about transient. Our average length of stay for January was 252 days for our 8 people that had left the residence. So out of those 8 people that left the residence, 5 we considered to be a positive discharge. They moved on towards independent living. 3 of those were, and then the other 3 were reoccurrence. And one of them was only with us for 4 days. They were not ready. And when somebody does have a reoccurrence, I've been doing this for a long time. I also, at one point, did work in substance abuse treatment. I have a lot of good partnerships throughout the community. When somebody wants help, I'm very good at getting somebody right back into a level of care that is best suited for them.
What's like the average cost per month? Is there a sliding scale? Does everyone pay the same, or how does that work?
There's different costs from the level 3 to the level 2. So the level 3 is $225 per week, and the level 2 is $200 per week. And for that $225, they're provided all the furnishings, all the utilities, computer access, coffee, creamer, sugar, cleaning supplies, and also case management services that are not, those are not reimbursable. Or some people say we charge for those services. We do not charge for those services. Those are not Medicaid reimbursable, or at least we do not. So.
One last question, I'm sorry. A lot of times people that have been involved in crimes may have some type of follow-up counseling or whatever. Do you provide that service, or can someone like that stay at one of your places, or where do you fit in the whole pyramid, I guess, of?
So you're required, one of our biggest partners are the recovery courts, both Merrimack County and Hillsborough. Recovery courts. I got the pleasure of going to Merrimack County's recovery court graduation 2 weeks ago. 3 out of the 5 graduates were our residents or alumni, and then they had a guest speaker that was a graduate of ours about 2 years ago. So we have incredible partnerships with them. If you are in a recovery court, you are required and mandated by us to fulfill all the requirements of that program. You are required to fulfill all the aftercare recommendations from, say, if you just completed a treatment program, a 90-day treatment program, if they're recommending counseling and maybe an intensive outpatient, then we will require you to, complete that aftercare recommendation too. Because in recovery, if you start saying, nah, I don't need to do that, there's probably a problem.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Have
you
a good
very
day.
much.
Yep.
Do you mind? I'll be very, very brief.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so if you could just introduce yourself and who you represent or your comments.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee, my name is Jake Berry. I'm the Vice President of Policy at New Futures. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit health policy and advocacy organization. We work on issues related to substance misuse and behavioral health around our state. We've been involved with this bill. We worked, going back 2 years, we've worked with the Fire Marshal's office, everyone else you heard here today in crafting this language. I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said. I do want to kind of clarify and reinforce a few different points. First off, I just want to, again, level set, and I know it was stated at the hearing, and I know, as we've alluded to here, lots of people and communities have strong feelings when recovery residences are proposed. But the data is absolutely crystal clear that neighborhoods that do have recovery houses in them have lower rates of substance use, have lower rates of overdose, have lower rates of substance-related crime. So I just want to level set. These are nothing but a benefit to the public health of both the individuals who reside in these houses and to the communities at large. Secondly, I really want to reinforce, there's been lots of talk today about occupancy restrictions. Again, as we heard from Mr. Salvucci from NH Core, there is an occupancy restriction related to, for their certification, 50 square foot per bed. I don't know offhand the NHPRR restriction, but I'm sure that there's one there as well. I have to imagine that these are in line with generally local zoning regulations. A few other points. There's been lots of talk about for-profit and nonprofit issues. I'm not entirely sure about the relevance of this. To my knowledge, and I'm not a zoning expert, you all are, but I don't believe that local residential zoning regulates land use based on an occupant's tax status. It doesn't do that for any other type of housing, to my knowledge, and I don't believe it would apply in this case. There's also been questions about the transient and non-transient language. I want to be clear. This language was based on the International Residential Code's definition of transient as being not more than 30 days occupancy. Again, that comes from the International Residential Code. And again, as you just heard from Mr. Gerson, in this case, at his home's average lengths of stays are 250 days plus, well in excess of the 30-day definition as applied here. I think those are the main points I wanted to make. Again, we strongly support this bill and thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Any questions for Mr. Berry? Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, does everyone else want to speak or have a pink card or make any comments or suggestions? The public comment section, and everyone's got a few minutes to discuss the bill within the subcommittee. Thank you. We're all set. We know that we have